Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Media Rights podcast where we have the very great pleasure of talking to Andrew Cooke, General Counsel at Fnatic. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Will Deller, a Senior Associate in Bird & Birds Media Entertainment and Sports team based in London, also very heavily involved in our esports and games practice. But far more importantly, Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrew Cooke, I'm General Counsel at Fnatic, one of the leading teams in esports, and formerly of promoters, music, sports, etc. Since I joined Fnatic, what I've been trying to do is help mature the back office function at Fnatic. Lots of other teams like Fnatic been investing in people like me over the course of the last couple of years. As valuations have increased, investors have started to look for sort of risk and process-oriented people to come into these kind of teams and level them up. So that's what we've been doing. And that's also tracked bigger deals in the space, right? So a lot more action in that area. So that's really been the focus for me since I joined. Wins have included esports first safeguarding policy. I would say pro gaming's first safeguarding policy to better off. I think we've tuned up sort of paperwork and risk stance in Fnatic across the board. Bigger and bigger sponsorships in the area as well. So some big deals done with the likes of BMW, but also big deals imminently on the horizon, and really happy to talk to you all today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And it's worth actually saying, I think most people will know about Fnatic, but Fnatic is obviously an esports organisation. It's a competitive gaming organisation, but much more than that, in that it's a sort of lifestyle brand. It's involved in producing gaming-related content, merchandise, sort of the whole nine yards. So it's really a very sort of diverse brand, but founded on competitive gaming.
Yeah, that's right. It's for anybody who's not in the space. Sorry, I should have covered that off. I was too busy talking about myself, Will, which is always a threat. Again, Fnatic is one of the longest-standing organisations in esports, so that means about 15 years. We are about third, I think, now in the all-time money list. We've won tournaments in many games. So, like most leading esports organisations, we don't just run one team. We run teams across Tier 1 titles like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Valorant, the newest Tier 1 title, and also in games like FIFA, Rainbow Six, and so on. As you correctly noted, we sell apparel as well as leading award-winning performance hardware available through shop.fnatic.com and various key retailers. And that's obviously been very helpful to us during COVID, for example, when lots of people invested in their hardware. Less so much now. Everyone's rushed out of their lockdown and into the pub and is no longer buying consumer goods. But very helpful about a year ago. And a unique thing within esports. No other esports team makes its own hardware. So that's been interesting over the last year as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. And that's really helpful. The first thing I was going to ask a couple of questions about your sort of observations of the industry in general, because I think like in your role as a general counsel, particularly in an organisation like Fnatic, you really have sort of, when we've spoken before, it's pretty clear that you've got under the skin of esports. And so just wanted your take on a couple of things, really. The first is, it's no secret that over the course of the pandemic, viewership figures within esports expanded enormously. So, teams that were having viewership figures of their Twitch streams in sort of the millions might find it's the tens of millions, and their fan base is growing and growing and growing. And did that actually, from a sort of strategic perspective, how did that impact Fnatic? Was it a sort of validation of everything it's done to date, or was it the case that actually they thought, well, we've got all these new fans that we might need to serve in different ways? Or, for example, is the fact that most esports viewership is all free mean that you actually need to think of creative ways to monetize your fan base in a different way? So how did the pandemic affect Fnatic?
Well, I'll put the hardware piece to one side because it's specific to Fnatic. It was, as I said, it was very helpful to have diverse revenues during the pandemic, that's for sure. Just going out to the sort of macro position, I think one of the things that the pandemic disproved was the idea that esports team revenues would track in line with viewership, right? I think for most teams, with some exceptions, by which I mean the teams who are principally influencer and social media reach focused, right? So you'll know people who know the space will know the kind of things we're talking about, and people who don't, it wouldn't really be helpful for me to necessarily identify them. But there are some teams who, particularly in the first era of esports, went very heavily into sort of esports or creators and influencers being the key drivers of their brand. And I think those teams probably did quite well because most of their deals were structured on the basis that they would benefit if more eyeballs came to them. But for the average team that's just creating average content, the increase in viewership showed that that wasn't a sustainable model. There will be a point, I think, where broadcast revenues, and I'm talking sometime in the future, where broadcast revenues are a viable sort of basis upon which to set up a sustainable esports team. But we're not there yet. So we're talking really about the bridge between those 2 points. So if COVID shows that there's, if viewership goes up, you don't make a whole lot more money as an esports team, then you have to make some decisions strategically as to what you're going to do between now and when those broadcast revenues do kick in. And apparel is probably also not the answer. And you've started to see a lot of teams now outsource apparel. So again, if we just think about the LEC, G2 doing the deal with Adidas, which was a big launch for them last year. Vitality is also an Adidas team now, and so on. So lots of teams have just outsourced that. And what that means, of course, is the team will not see all the potential from scaling apparel. Most of that will go to, most of the scale benefit will go to the manufacturer, most likely. So that leads to, once you've taken out broadcast rights and you've taken out apparel as a source of revenue, then, well, what are you left with? Well, you're left with, and esports as entertainment is not a product that's going to scale, as we've said, because COVID shows that that's not the case. Well, Fnatic has an answer to that question, which is we sell hardware. So we use esports and creators as channels to help promote the sale of our hardware, which, again, makes sense. Like just on a sort of like a linear proposition, that makes sense. We also then use the entertainment as a top of funnel kind of fan engagement piece, and you've seen some evolution in how we do that. So again, one of the things that you'll see, in addition to this, the esports teams making decisions around what this additional sort of revenue line is going to be, you'll see brand definition coming in esports. What you've kind of had between, say, 2016 and 2020, so the ramp up to the launch of franchising of League of Legends, and then the period after that, when basically people were just jumping on teams because it was esports and they wanted to get involved. So you saw a lot of seed investment money come in at that stage. I think you'll now see brand definition in the same way that you do within sport, right? So, traditional stick and ball type sport. So you will have, I'm trying to think of a good example, the way in which Barcelona separates itself from Real Madrid, right? One almost kind of imperialist, one, mass game club type, club of the people, not talking too much about the debt and so on, but ultimately very different brand propositions. I think you'll see that kind of thing happen more in esports. So brands will start to emerge from the mass of esports brands, right, and start to talk about different things and different aspects of their brand personalities in a way to try to appeal to consumers outside of the people who are currently watching esports, right? And for Fnatic, again, that's been to try to talk a lot more about performance, so the process, the journey of going towards winning, rather than just people hosting trophies, which has been the sort of traditional esports image. And that means, again, if you think about our work in safeguarding, you can see how that connects into that, because it's about building that brand around gaming and around esports, and accepting also that esports is not a niche activity, or let's say gaming, is not a niche activity anymore. Gaming is now an activity that a very broad demographic, men and women, multiple ages, people who have loved gaming for as long as I've loved it, as long as you've loved it, also people who are coming into it, people who used to play and now don't because competitive gaming perhaps disengages them and so on. All those people are now the kind of people that esports brands are going to try to attract. And for us, again, performance and products are part of that. for the esports teams. Some have doubled down on the entertainment content piece. Some have tried to go through platforms, right? They create their own platforms. So I can think of another team that's investing quite heavily at the moment in platform services to try and create sort of esports as a service type opportunities, right? That revenue stream. You won't see those things happening right now unless you're very, very engaged with the community. But I think in the years to come, anybody who's interested in this space should look for those kind of moves. All of those relate back, as this very long and rambling answer eventually will, to your initial question of how's COVID affected esports teams, and the sort of the short answer is it's made them make hard strategic decisions that they didn't have to make up until that point.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, just to pick on one area that you, in those examples of different monetization and revenue streams, one that it'll be interesting to expand on a little bit more is on the partnership side. Because I know it's an area where you guys are really active and also done some really cool and interesting things. But to my mind, I agree with you in saying that longer term, there is a future for broadcasting rights to actually finance a lot of the esports ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's not there yet. So to my mind, though, you have this enormous pool of viewers, the demographic, and in a demographic that actually brands are finding it increasingly hard to reach via perhaps more traditional means. And so sponsorship to me would seem like a way that you say, well, actually, is esports really undervalued as a sponsorship proposition? And I was talking recently to a senior lawyer at a major consumer brand who are involved in sponsorship of everything from traditional sports to music events to esports to all sorts. And he said that by far and away, esports gives them their highest ROI on any sponsorship property by miles. So, have you noticed at all that that the market for esports, that esports sponsorship rights is an easier market than it was before the pandemic, or harder, or just different?
Well, first of all, I would definitely validate that insight by that exec you spoke to. Our data, which is provided by Nielsen, says exactly the same thing. I think almost to its detriment sometimes. Like my wife used to work for a FMCG brand, and they would, when they make consumer claims, so 100% of or X% of consumers say that after using this product for 2 weeks, they saw less wrinkles or whatever it was. Yeah. They would never say 100% because it wasn't a believable number, right? So it's always a kind of like a 93.2% or something on this kind of lines. And this is one of the challenges we're actually facing with the numbers, is they show such a massive improvement over an investment in a traditional sport that they almost become unbelievable to execs that we present to. But that's a bit of a sidebar. I think the appetite for investment in esports amongst these brands, or let's say amongst non-endemic brands, by which I mean, and you'll be familiar with that term, I'm sure many of the listeners will, but we separate in esports endemic brands from non-endemic brands. BMW would be a non-endemic brand because it doesn't have any sort of presence in computers or gaming or technology per se. It's an auto manufacturer, obviously, or mobility solutions provider, I should say. We're always interested to bring non-endemic brands into the space, and for some of those brands, esports still has some links to, or is a challenging investment because either, I'd say, the CMO doesn't really understand it, right? So one of the things that our partnerships team is very good at is explaining things to people who don't understand esports, breaking down some of those barriers in terms of decision making, making them be in a place to be able to brief their boards and stakeholders about esports and get them in a place of comfort. So even once we've got over that, we still have questions around things like toxicity in esports, right? So esports culture, meme culture, how brands will sort of deploy in that space. That's a real challenge for some brands. Our answer to that question, of course, is, well, either to implicitly criticize other traditional teams, like, I don't know if you've been to a football match recently, but what's said on the terraces doesn't necessarily correspond with, let's say, polite practice. It's a kind of a digital version of that sometimes online. We're not here to solve toxicity. We are here to promote positive gaming, and brands can be helpful in in the promotion of positive gaming. Or it's just a general kind of like, this sounds like something which still isn't really fully formed or mainstream, so we don't want to put our brand in connection with it. And some of that is about overall partner evolution. So when a brand like BMW makes the decision to step into a space, it emboldens other brands to step into that space, either just because of FOMO or because, you know, they see it, if a generally conservative brand like that is prepared to put its marketing money on this, there must be something to it. And I think a lot of the brands have been very smart in terms of how they deployed. The challenges to us outside of those, sort of specifically within Fnatic, I think are, look, esports has become a lot more competitive, right? So Fnatic had a sort of, I won't say a first mover advantage, but Fnatic was dominant in the 1.0 era of esports. So this is the stage where you're seeing professional players, you're seeing stadiums full of fans, you're seeing sort of multiple revenue lines, but you're not necessarily seeing kind of hyper growth. And in fact, I had a conversation with one of our team directors. We have a transfer window upcoming, so we're playing through a split in League of Legends currently. After that, then we have the World Championships, and then after that, the season will end, and there will be a transfer window. And you know, we have some players who will be out of contracts during that time. That's a matter of sort of public record because they're all on a contract database, which is issued by Riot, the developer of the game. We're sort of talking tactically about that transfer window, some decisions sort of bubbling up. When we look at some of our competitor teams in the LEC and we say, where are they actually getting the resources from to be competitive with the kind of players that we might be interested to acquire, or indeed to pay the salaries and transfer fees for players that we might want to sell? And we're sort of scratching our heads a little bit on it. And this shows you how hard it is now to be competitive in esports. You know, at any stage, and we're fighting on multiple battles because we fight in multiple games. To be competitive in a game, the level of resources that you need to deploy just goes up and up every year. So whenever we create a performance advantage, so that might be, for example, we were early on in introducing performance-related staff, so mental coaches, physical performance coaches, nutritionists, specialist facilities, all that kind of stuff. Once you do that, it very quickly goes around the system and other teams start to do that as well. So we're always looking for these performance advantages. And that obviously also involves a quite significant deployment of resource. So that also means, because a lot of sponsors kind of correlate trophy lift with investable, right? Because everyone understands the trophy lift. That also makes it much harder to fight for these kind of sponsor dollars. So we have to do more creative things with the partners that we do get together, and you kindly credited us for doing creative stuff, but I think our work in brand deployment in games, so branded maps in Fortnite, branded maps in CSGO, NFTs is also a very interesting space, so actually digital items and that growth as a vertical. I think we try to be progressive in how we use those kind of things to entice the sponsors in, because once you get the sponsors in, you deploy the great content, they want to come back. That enables you to have more resources to invest in the talent. That should bring the sponsors back again. So you get a nice kind of virtuous circle going. And right now, I feel like we're in a good space from that standpoint as well.
That's really interesting, Andy. And you've actually unhelpfully presaged one of my next question, which was actually around in-game activation on the partnership side, because and more broadly, really, because to my mind, if I were a sponsor, actually getting to place something in a game is a particularly interesting and unique thing to be able to do, which you can't replicate with many other sponsorship, or really any other sponsorship properties.
Yeah.
It is obviously riddled with potential legal issues, and so in your role in general counsel must sometimes be a bit of a head scratcher. But do you think that the likes of NFTs and, I suppose, NFTs and in-game assets generally, is that a sort of key area of growth, do you think, for on the partnership side and for the business more broadly?
Yeah, I would probably, so to put NFTs on the side for a second, I think in-game activation undoubtedly is a massive growth area. Like there's no doubt about that. And the reason for that, of course, is because so there's going to be phases of this. The first phase that we're in now is just branded maps played by creators, creating activation of the brand in a way which is very sort of viral and shareable, but also creates an interaction of considerable depth that offers something of interest to the fan. Okay, so you to talk in less abstract terms, you'll know that the best sponsorship activations are those that are perceived to offer value to the fan, right? So I, as a fan, interact with the brand. It adds value to my life. I gain a positive impression of the brand. If the brand is forced upon me in the course of an activation, right, then I feel much less positive towards the brand, right? So we did an activation recently with Lavazza. As part of its Icons of Italy series, we got our sort of one of our lead creators, Power, to play a branded Fortnite map, including sort of lots of Lavazza IP. The average dwell time of a player of that map was about 27 minutes. Dwell time as a thing, sort of, most advertisers will be happy to get 30 seconds of dwell time on something. If you think about how quickly you'll scroll past a advert in your Twitter feed, right, or in a sort of skyscraper on the side of a website, even if it can be there, we're talking about microseconds. Never mind seconds or minutes. So that's a huge level of engagement with something. And of course, once people start to film themselves playing the map, because you gamify the concept, right? So how quickly can you build it? What's the highest score can you get? All those sort of things. People are now creating that they're creating the content live, interacting with the brand, but then posting that online and challenging other people to beat them and so on. The viral impact of that in terms of impressions and dwell time aggregated, that's where you talked earlier on about these incredible returns. That's where those kind of returns come from. So obviously fans are going to start to get like the novelty of those kind of things is going to wear off, just like something like fan zones at a tournament initially did. Like initially that was a great bolt on to your experience as a fan, to go to the fan zone whilst you're there and have a sort of it increases the sort of engagement of families with that and all that sort of thing. But now everywhere has a fan zone and they just become really commodified. So that's not any fun anymore. So you have to think about what the next step is. The next step is the bringing together not just of brand elements, right, but an overall brand specific experience that forms part of a wider game. So that's where you see this kind of Ariana Grande, times Fortnite type experience, right? Where effectively it's Ariana Grande as a brand with her music as the environment for it, coming into this social environment within Fortnite where people interact and engage with that and obviously create content out of that as well. That's Ariana Grande as a brand, but I think you can see how a major brand, I'm talking about, one of the world's top 10, a kind of a Nike or a McDonald's or something like that, would want to participate in that space and do it in a way which was dynamic. And again, going back to our friends at BMW didn't just sponsor Fnatic, they sponsored initially 5 esports teams around the world. And they did that to enable them to sort of bounce off each other, to compare their brands with each other, for them to create ways to use the BMW brand, which was interesting and dynamic for fans, has been very successful for them. And I think you'll probably see those bigger brands start to do that, either with creators or with players and teams, or with both, right? To just look for angles of how do we create these experiences for the next generation of consumer that will live a substantial part of their life in these games and systems. So there's lots of interesting stuff happening there. In relation to NFTs specifically, again, NBA Top Shots, all that sort of thing, do show the power of collectibles. I do think that authenticatable collectibles are probably the first real world application of NFTs that actually really works, right? Or let's say of consumer engagement with blockchain, right? So you can talk about, okay, blockchain's the new internet, it's going to change all of our lives, decentralized financial solutions, et cetera, et cetera. For most people, they just like their bank and their credit card and those kind of things, I would suggest, right? I think we're a long way away from fully decentralized finance. But the idea of a collectible product that I can trade on multiple platforms, has some kind of intrinsic value, either on a market level or just because I like the idea of having something and sort of collecting it. But I can be absolutely certain there's only, 1 or 10 or 100 or whatever it is of these in the world, and I am one of them.
Yeah.
That's something that people just understand, and it's a nice application of blockchain. So, what we've seen so far is a few sort of esports related NFT products getting out there. Got some traction, some sponsors starting to participate in that as well as a kind of like a fan token type product. So I think there's still, and we've seen this with a couple of esports teams that have launched a product where there's been a financial element to it, and it's kind of, it's the financial value has gone up and then it's been dumped and it's gone down and some fans have been burned from that kind of thing. Like, I'm not talking about that kind of thing. That we're in that stage at the moment, which is wheels spinning in various different ways, some gaining traction, some not gaining traction, some exploding and therefore reducing the chances that wheels will spin in the future. For me, we haven't seen yet a sort of like a really solid collectible product which is platform agnostic, which people can trade and enjoy trading and have confidence that the underpinning smart contract actually has legitimacy. Once we reach that level, then I think that you will see NFTs form part of effectively another vertical for esports teams revenues and traditional sports team revenues. I think there's lots of potential there until we actually see that product hit the market fully. I don't think we can really have any firm views on what that potential is. What I do see, and you took sort of metaverse and NFTs link, is in relation to things like digital apparel, right? In-game collectibles, so basically getting rid of the black market in skins, right? Creating smart contracts around skins and skin trading. I think that sort of thing makes sense. There, you're going to need developers to build in open world sort of tradable platforms into their products or into their games to allow that kind of thing to happen. My experience of working with the larger developers is that they think like rights holders in traditional sports. So there's a lot of parallels in having conversations with Riot and FIFA, for example. FIFA, in my experience, and this is also true of like major football clubs and things, they tend to think more about how to lock down and control, right? And then sort of give little bits of that control back to, for example, a host city or a licensee, pardon me, rather than think, okay, what could we do if we actually open this up? Right, that tends not to be the mindset. I'll give an example. I remember I was at a conference a couple of years ago when we could still do those kind of things in person. And there was somebody there from a Premier League club, and they were talking about fan associations, licensing fan associations. And they basically said, well, actually, what we spend most of our time doing is shutting down fan associations, right? Because we only want to deal with, the one official team fan association in Timbuktu, right? We only want to deal with one, and they want to be the official one. And we require them to sign up to our governance protocols and this licensing agreement, and they have to be capitalized to this extent, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, esports is, generally speaking, the completely other way around. Like, you want as many people to be engaged with it as possible, and for there to be as few barriers as possible to that. So, getting over that barrier, I think, is going to be a little bit difficult. But once we've got over that barrier, and these things are tradable, and there's an active market in these kind of things, I think the secondary on that, so not even the primary transaction, the secondary transaction on that can be really interesting for teams, be really interesting for creators, because they can create interesting, fun products that are interesting to fans, participate in revenue from those, and create this kind of nice holistic return for themselves. So this is like Animal Crossing creators, right? Where you're creating, we saw people do this like straight out of the gate. There was a Fnatic sort of Animal Crossing skin out there that somebody put together with like the little monster logo on the sleeve and the black and orange and everything. Like, the detail was really good. And those kind of things, if they were to become fully tradable on an open world platform, you can see how there could be an interesting market in that. And again, it's provided the smart contracts are correctly sort of put together, be really interesting for lots of people. So I'm excited about that and how that connects into these kind of metaverse or the metaverse as a whole. I think the digital product piece, we just haven't even started to see the potential of that yet. That will come through, provided everyone's open-minded enough about it, and also doesn't get too greedy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. I'll ask my metaverse question now, as you've raised it. I mean, you talked about blockchain potentially being the new internet, but a lot of people talk about the metaverse being the new internet. And so, for those of you who've heard the term but might not be familiar with it, this is sort of where the virtual and real worlds collide, or where the real world becomes the virtual world, or vice versa, depending on how you look at it. So, to take an example, Facebook saying they have plans to be able to port a hologram of somebody next to you to be able to look at the same screen as you virtually when you're working in the sort of same office environment. Could be any number of things, but really it's sort of the convergence of the digital or virtual and real worlds. A lot of the sort of early use cases for the metaverse have been seen in gaming. So Fortnite's a really good example of how people can live for want of a better phrase, a full life, but sort of in a virtual setting. So they don't just go on there to play the game and to shoot people and win the game. They actually go on there to socialize. So they go to virtual concerts and they meet their friends and they trade things and whatever else might happen. Gaming's been is sort of seems to be at the forefront of the development of the metaverse, and Fnatic as a sort of a real sort of legacy brand in esports, which itself has been a testing ground for a lot of things we now see in video games and in entertainment more broadly. Do you think that Fnatic is particularly well placed to take advantage of the opportunities that the metaverse presents? Because, as you say, you're already involved in gaming culture, in streaming, in NFTs, in in-game items, creating and using and being part of virtual worlds. Is that a conversation that Fnatic is actively a part of?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot in relation to our conversation with partners, as you can probably tell from what I said before. Like we're thinking actively of ways to bridge people into this space. I think that's the first phase role for teams is most likely as a conduit into the metaverse conceptually, right? And also in terms of brokering how brands and products best work in this environment, which we very natively and intuitively understand, right? So if I think about Fnatic back office, generally, you mentioned earlier on how tricky it can be to look at these concepts and kind of try and draft around them. Like, yeah. I can tell you now, we're working right now on NFT related stuff. It's really hard to look. I mean, obviously, that's the job, and that's why it's interesting. But to try and look even a year in the future as to where this could be, and draft around that, particularly from an exclusivity standpoint. Like, for example, if you want to, even with a very traditional partner like BMW, if you've done the deal with BMW, and say, not maybe 10 years ago is probably the right timeline. At that stage, I would query whether BMW would have seen Uber as being a competitor, right?
Yeah.
So at that stage, the idea that you would use Uber not as a substitute for taxis, but as a substitute for owning a vehicle may not necessarily have been on everybody's agenda. It's that kind of sort of forward-looking thing, but on absolute steroids, because both the crypto space and sort of this transition of games from being an entertainment experience, i.e. a substitute for, I don't know, kicking a ball around or watching a film, to being a total replacement, not just for Facebook, but also for the games that you play, the music that you listen to, the movies that you watch. All those things combine into a place which is this kind of controlled environment. Then with two massive drivers coming in, which is kids already spending significant amounts of money on virtual goods, right? That's now become habitual because of games like Fortnite. And then also, of course, we started talking about the pandemic, but you can't get away from the fact that the pandemic has normalized the idea of working with your colleagues virtually, right? So that I now live most of my life at home, but I expand my horizons virtually, right? When we talk about that concept, those two drivers alone, we couldn't have predicted well, not say a year ago, but 2 years ago. So when I started in the job, that I don't think even, I mean, obviously Roblox hadn't IPO'd at that stage, but metaverse concepts were well understood within the gaming industry, I would say. And at that stage, obviously Netflix was already saying, look, our biggest competitors are not, you know, social media platforms, it's games or whatever it was. All those things have just gone so fast right now. We're just trying to hang on. So you would say, what's the role of Fnatic into it? I can only think one phase ahead at this particular stage. Like obviously, we are actively thinking about future phases, but at this stage right now, I think it's almost like I drew the parallel with Uber, but thinking about it, the better parallel might actually be the first phase of influencer marketing, where at that stage it was just tell us how to speak to the people that are going to speak to the people that we want to talk to. Yeah. I think it's probably that's probably the better parallel.
Yeah, and I think that given the way that the speed and the manner in which the esports industry has developed, I think that brands like Fnatic are particularly well, because they're so adaptable, are particularly well placed to identify what the opportunities are in the metaverse and to be able to capitalize on them and actually get in on the ground quickly.
It emphasizes the importance, though, Will. So I agree with that, but it emphasizes the importance of creating specificity around your brand, right? So you're not just insert generic esports team brand. You have brand values that people connect with, and they carry into that universe, right? Because right now we have this incredible social following, but a lot of that is driven by the fact that we are game agnostic and we are flexible. So if a game does arise, right, we can jump in. And so like Valorant, which has gone from, I mean, obviously the timing of the launch of Valorant couldn't have been any better if they tried, because it literally launches, but at that moment when everybody is stuck at home, I think it was, second or third week of April 2020, everybody's stuck at home. They do that wonderful beta keys get issued out through streamers. So everybody starts watching specific streamers to the possibility of getting a key to get into Valorant early. And of course, when they get into Valorant early, they just start boasting about the fact they're in Valorant early. So you have this huge level of online attention, but that carries, right? So the sort of the first world championships of Valorant, you get 1 million concurrent viewers. That's insane for a new esports title. I mean, there are many esports titles that are well viewed, which would never even touch 1 million TCU for a leading tournament. I mean, FIFA, which is obviously a very well-known game, but isn't a very much watched game, as you'll know, doesn't even get close to that. The only time it will get close to that is if you had some kind of stunt, Messi plays Ronaldo on FIFA, and you have a kind of like a, people are just interested in it because let's just see how good Ronaldo is at FIFA. That will be the most watched game of FIFA ever, but you would never repeat it, of course.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Andy. Fascinating insights as always, and your time is hugely appreciated. That is the end of part 1 of this interview for Media Rights, talking to Andrew Cooke, General Counsel at Fnatic, on everything esports, tech, gaming, the metaverse, and beyond. So please tune into part 2, which you'll be able to access via the link below. So thanks very much, Andy.
It's fine. It's no more concise than part 1, unfortunately.